Welcome to the Affirming Minds Podcast, where we equip like-minded mental health professionals with a therapeutic toolkit that helps add to a more engaging, fulfilled, and effective mental health practice. Each empowering episode can stand alone as a continuing education pod course or a very valuable professional or personal resource with insightful expert interviews, practical resources, industry news, and lots of inspiration. We help the modern therapist thrive at work. Now let's welcome your host, a dedicated therapist and passionate educator, Shaina Siber, LCSW.
Welcome to the Affirming Minds Podcast. I'm your host, Shaina Siber. I'm so happy that you tuned in today. This show is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional treatment or clinical supervision. If you're in need of support, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area. All clinical examples shared are fully de-identified, composites, or vignettes. No real client information is ever disclosed. If you're interested in earning continuing education credits for this episode, head to affirmmentalhealth.com. Our membership gives you access to CEs for live virtual workshops, self-study webinars, and eligible podcast episodes right here on the Affirming Minds podcast. Today, we're talking about a topic that touches nearly every client's life, but often goes unnamed in therapy: financial anxiety and financial trauma. These struggles could show up as avoidance, overspending, compulsive saving, or fear-based decision-making, and they can have profound impacts on mental health, relationships, and overall well-being. My guest today is Michelle Johnston, registered psychologist from Alberta, Canada, and founder of Take Care Therapy Co. Michelle has over 10 years of experience in the field of mental health and specializes in helping individuals navigate financial stress, work-life balance, personal growth, and mental well-being. She integrates evidence-based approaches, including acceptance and commitment therapy, EMDR, CBT, and solution-focused therapy, and is also trauma of money certified. In our conversation, we'll explore how financial trauma and early money messages shape adult money beliefs and behaviors, the common patterns of financial anxiety you can look for in your clients, and therapeutic strategies to help clients repair their relationship with money in a values-aligned and compassionate way. And before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Jane. Jane is an all-in-one practice management software that helps therapists run their practices smoothly with easy scheduling, billing, charting, and more. Learn more at the link in our show notes. Now let's dive in. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today on the Affirming Minds podcast. I am so happy to have you on. Can you start off by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about how you came to specialize in this really important intersection between mental health and financial wellness?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Johnston. I am a registered psychologist located in Calgary, Alberta in Canada. And the areas that I focus on and specialize in my work with clients are balance, stress, anxiety, and then a niche area in my practice is financial therapy. This area specifically, I would say I fell into it through both personal and professional experience. As a therapist, I worked with lots of clients dealing with stress and anxiety to various forms, and lots of clients in dealing with like work stress to various degrees as well. But through that experience, I found that money was something that came up in a lot of our conversations in sessions, but not something that I saw any other clinicians were focusing on specifically. And so through just, my own experiences, I started looking into it a little bit. I'm someone who's personally interested in finance as well. And through doing my research, I found that in the States, there is the Financial Therapy Association, and started exploring that area and learning about other financial therapists who are practicing, and saw it as a real gap in the city that I live in, that we don't really have anyone who focuses on this specifically. We have lots of therapists who focus on relationships with couples or issues like sex and intimacy, or therapists who help clients deal with their relationship with food or disordered eating behaviors, but nobody really focusing on the relationship we have with money. So seeing that as a gap, I wanted to step into that area to offer something different to people living in this city.
Amazing. And I would say financial wellness and financial stress and political anxiety, for me, I think are the two biggest issues I've seen over the past year or two, really percolating for a lot of people. And Michelle, you are a wonderful neighbor to the north. So I know that you're in Canada, you're in the US. There's some, I think, probably overlap in some of the financial stressors that are happening. Some may be regionally unique. But what are you seeing as some of those structural and systemic factors, whether it be inflation or unaffordable housing or economic instability, that are showing up in the therapeutic milieu?
Yeah, I see a lot of those things in the city that I live in as well. And I think it's, especially with something like inflation, for example, it's a goalpost that really just keeps moving. And for a lot of people who are maybe my age or a similar generation, it might be that the goals and desires and dreams you had when you were younger are just becoming more and more unattainable and just harder to achieve overall, which can be really disappointing and create a lot of feelings of hopelessness or shame. And these systems really place a lot of the burden on the individual and can make us feel like it's our job to just work harder or earn more money, hustle harder. And that's not always the solution, because then often that can create other problems in its own way. And even other financial professionals who might advertise, you just need to learn how to budget or budget your money better. In that way can also really instill or bring up even more shame for individuals, because it's not always that simple as to just do something like budget your money better when, let's say, for example, rent is taking half of your paychecks, or it's hard to even just get by with the amount of money that you have coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think recognizing that these financial stressors probably run the gamut of people in all different sorts of financial situations, whether what their incomes are. But I do think also naming explicitly and talking about what is the impact on mental health, physical health, when someone might be living in poverty or poverty adjacent circumstances. What are some of the things that you, through your work, are noticing about just what is the toll and impact of that level of financial stress?
Poverty in its own way is a form of chronic stress, right? And when we experience chronic stress, it's something that really can flood our nervous system and hijack our executive functioning, right? Our ability to think critically, our ability to make decisions, plan ahead for the future, even understand the consequences of some of our actions and behaviors. So we really get stuck in this sort of survival mode, and a lot of our actions and behaviors, and especially with money, can be highly emotional and more reactive versus a logical type of response to the situation that we're in. And so, again, we might just be making a lot of choices and decisions purely from that point of survival, and it can become a very hard cycle to get out of without the right support.
Absolutely. I think that is so powerful what you said about reactivity. And I feel like it's something that we don't talk enough about, that piece of reactivity when people are in dire financial stress. And what also adds to the shame when people make judgments about people's financial decisions. But this is something I've run into a lot with clients I work with that are carrying incredible burdens of debt, are struggling to pay their bills, and then they'll like reactively spend money on some impulse purchases or eating out. And a lot of it is there's this tide of these feelings of futility. This is an unworkable situation. I cannot get myself out of this. And it becomes very much about surviving the day and how do I soothe myself, what I have access to, because these bigger financial goals feel so out of reach. Of getting to a place of stability feels so foreign, so hopeless, that you see these reactive patterns and behavior that really become more entrenched. So I think understanding this lens of the psychology of spending is really important. And again, I really just appreciate your voice in this, because the conduit of money is tied into the fabric of our very existence and survival. Nobody is getting through the day without having some sort of interface with a relationship with money. And yet it is, I think, really de-emphasized in a lot of our clinical education and conversation. How would you define financial anxiety, and what are some of the most common ways you see it showing up in the lives of the clients that you're serving?
I just want to go back to your point earlier, just to add that another thing I see is that a lot of clients, especially because financial therapy is such a newer area of focus and people don't really know about it, is they don't necessarily think that if I'm struggling with financial anxiety, that I can talk to my therapist about it, whether or not they're someone like myself who is more specialized and focused in this area, or just their regular therapist who works with anxiety and stress in various forms. And so, again, when we're in that state of money feels really hard and money feels really tough to earn, or life feels like it's a struggle because of our financial situation, even thinking about accessing therapy for self care or just taking care of our own mental health in general is not something that people are necessarily maybe able to afford, even though it could be very beneficial. It's just something that's not on your priority list most of the time when you're really just focused on surviving and kind of getting through the day or the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I have heard that sort of perspective for a lot of people where therapy can feel an indulgence, right? And that especially if their money is so scarce. Even for folks that may be insured, if there's like a copay or co-insurance, even that when there's such limited discretionary income available, that really can feel out of reach. So I think definitely this broader conversation about access and financial anxiety is something to consider for sure. Yeah. Any early life experiences or family dynamics that you see cultivating or shaping someone's relationship with money?
Yeah, so it's like a lot of the clients that I see in exploring their childhood experiences with money, there's usually messages or behaviors or patterns that they've learned or heard throughout their upbringing that can really shape the relationship that they have with money today. It can look like various things, like maybe a parent went through a job loss and then that really impacted the family's financial situation. Maybe the family grew up, or they grew up in a family with lower income or lower socioeconomic status, or parents who perhaps struggled with substance use or gambling or other types of addictions. And if money was tight in the home, it can create a lot of this sort of scarcity mindset. And then as an adult, that's where people can feel like, again, money is hard to earn or money doesn't come easily. Money is a source of stress. And for some people, it's maybe even messages around having money or having access to wealth means that you're not a good person, right? Or there's other types of messages that being someone who has nice things or lives in a nice home is just doing it to show off, or other things that can create shame for people that when they do have greater access to money can feel really bad about it and have this tendency to be like, what, money is not something that I want to keep, and perhaps have a tendency to prefer to give it away more than spend it on themselves or invest it for themselves. A lot of guilt and shame in that type of area. And it can be other experiences too, like even going through, if their parents went through a divorce or something like that, and living with a single parent now on a single income can really change an individual situation. So yeah, there's lots of different various types of experiences that can really impact the way somebody thinks about and behaves and feels about money today.
Yeah, absolutely. The way it's showing up for clients, are you having folks first talk through like their spending habits and behaviors? Is it they're coming in with those beliefs or schemas about money showing up first? When are you starting to notice and name that financial anxiety or stress is coming up for someone?
Yeah, I think a lot of clients tend to come to me because they read through my website or Psychology Today, where I mention that this is an area of focus and I talk about financial anxiety. And a lot of people find that they really resonate with the way that I've described it or laid it out, as this constant feeling of fear or worry about money, avoidance types of behaviors, things like losing sleep, stress over their financial situation. And so, in identifying those things in themselves, I get a lot of clients who reach out at that point for extra support. And it's a lot of the time clients who I would say have some curiosity or are interested in financial wellness and interested in making a change, but not really knowing where to go to for that kind of support that they're looking for. It may be stuff that they don't feel comfortable talking with their accountant about, especially stuff that maybe again is from those early childhood experiences or things from the past that are more personal. They might not feel comfortable talking about these things with their financial planner. They don't want to be sold more financial products. And so really looking for just a space more to talk about the emotional impact and the relationship that they have with money and how it causes, stress and other problems in their life.
Can you talk through what your concept is? If this is something like a financial trauma, what would constitute financial trauma compared to just general stress about money or financial anxiety?
I would say that financial trauma is more deeply rooted, and it's something that gets activated in the present moment whenever we experience something that triggers us, right? So anytime we're dealing with a situation around money that sort of looks the same, sounds the same, smells the same, feels the same as a past experience, that our mind and our nervous system is transported back into the past, and we have a lot of these uncomfortable feelings, various forms of avoidance type behaviors showing up around money, and are just experiencing these cycles where we feel really stuck and really hard to get out of. And a lot of that sort of fight, flight, freeze response being strongly activated anytime it comes to dealing with something around money related situations.
Yeah. I think I've seen this come up for some clients where there's been a experience of probably the way that they would experience, especially as like a child, where they don't have as much of a working knowledge of what was going on with the family's finances, is like the rug being pulled out from under them, that perhaps they were in relative financial stability evidenced by stable housing, access to food, access to transportation, and a safe educational environment, and then overnight evicted and had nowhere to go or in a shelter. I've seen this a lot too with people where there's been displacement if they've had to immigrate from another country where they had financial stability in one country, but because of political unrest or religious or cultural persecution, now they're coming to the States and are living in abject poverty where perhaps their family was in like very good financial standing in their country of origin. So I've seen sometimes financial trauma manifest in that way, where there's this immediate loss that then has this immediate impact on access, oftentimes changes in social support, the way they're treated by other people. Are there other examples that you've seen of what you have seen people survive in terms of financial trauma that has stayed with them and presented in that way?
Yeah, even things more recent like COVID, right?
Mm.
People job situation changing almost overnight, people having to experience things like stock market volatility, losing large sums of money when people were maybe expecting to, retire or be financially off from what they were putting in, various levels of things going on in the economy, job loss, various crisis, even relationship separation, right? Here and now might be something that, again, if you're a higher earner, let's say, if there's any kind of differentiation in the levels of income between partners, sometimes that can cause financial trauma in that way because it just creates a change in the system that we're not necessarily prepared for or equipped to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so interesting too. The relationship dynamics and potentially gender roles or family roles and how they get so linked to money as well. What are some signs that you see? I know obviously people seek you out, so they probably have the insight. This is something that's coming out for them. But maybe if they're more of the generalist or someone who's seeing someone in through group practice or community mental health, what do you see as some signs that someone's anxiety about money has become clinically significant or is interfering with their well-being?
I would say definitely when it shows up as forms of avoidance, in the sense that maybe they are avoiding paying bills or avoiding looking at a credit card statement because that feels just very overwhelming. If there's any obsessing about finances or ruminating about money that's really interfering with daily functioning in that way, like it's getting in the way of sleep. People might be more so comfortable naming the stress related to work or feelings of burnout because they're having to work so hard to earn money can be a link in a way to that financial anxiety or that financial stress. If they're expressing like difficulty making financial decisions without, again, like spiraling and overthinking about it, those can all be potential red flags of this type of financial anxiety that's, again, really getting in the way. Could it be even things around, decisions around career changes, right? I often see lots of clients who feel stuck in a role or position or company that's not serving them or aligned with their values, but because it pays well or has good benefits, they really can't afford to leave because of the impact or significant change it might cause on their lifestyle. So when it's really, dominating the client's like mental space and then really hindering their ability to function effectively, I would say that those are what I would classify as more clinically significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And do you feel like the majority of the people that you are treating are the earners in their families, that they're the actual ones that are either solely or at least partially responsible for bringing in that income? Because I imagine even for people that are dependents, financial anxiety can come up, but there also might be some like clinical differences in the people who are the earners for themselves or their family versus those who might like more be dependent on others financially.
I would say it's definitely a range that probably seems to be more so the individuals that I see, but I also see individuals who, on the flip side, might feel a sense of pressure to earn more or do more because they might live with a spouse or a partner who is a higher earner. But I would say a lot of the clients I do see tend to be the high achieving, perfectionist type. And again, in doing so, they might be experiencing stress or burnout at work, but also stress and anxiety related to their financial situation. When we start to dig deeper, we see some of these behaviors and high expectations or pressure that they might be putting on themselves can come from experiences of financial trauma, in their early years. And these behaviors that they are doing now, again, working long hours or in excess, come from this place of maybe feeling, they need to keep up or try to maintain a certain type of lifestyle. Maybe it's something that they are trying to make up for not having in childhood, or even for some individuals feeling a sense of obligation to support, let's say, elderly or aging parents or family members. So it's really, like I would say, a range. I also work with couples too who have difficulty communicating or navigating finances in their relationship and it being a source of stress or conflict in the relationship. So looking at different ways to address those issues and make talking about money a little bit easier. Definitely lots of different types of situations when it comes to money, because again, it is just something that's such a big part of our life.
Yeah. And I think just that I could see the couples work being so rich because people have come to relationships with such different expectations around money, different values around money. So sometimes like getting on board and getting some sort of like middle path and plan together when people are coming from very different perspectives and experiences and maybe have very different relationships with money. I can imagine just like needing that support to get in some alignment, particularly if some of this financial anxiety or trauma is part of both or one of the people's like lived experience. Yeah, absolutely. So for what would be your suggestions of how therapists can start to facilitate these conversations around one's relationship with money and assess for financial anxiety, especially if the client's not bringing this up explicitly?
I like to start off with asking clients about how money feels to them and what does it mean to them, because it can feel different and mean different things to each individual, depending again, like on your background, culture, experiences, and your values. And start using that as a starting point to explore what is the narrative that they have around money and the experiences that they had with money growing up, how parents or caregivers or other family members dealt with money, just really being curious about it and naming it. And I think even for therapists ourselves, exploring what our own relationship with money looks like too, so that we feel a bit more comfortable addressing it with our clients. I know just in my own experience through other therapists I've met and just other things that I see online on social media that for therapists too, money is a difficult conversation. We're human, just like our clients. And sometimes for any type of individual who's in a helping profession, there's this unspoken notion that we're doing this work not for the money. And so again, that can just further create more shame in ourselves when it comes to earning money for the work that we're doing, and make it more difficult for us to navigate the relationship that we have with our own financial situation. And if we're not able to explore and understand that, it's more difficult to bring it up and talk about it with clients too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important that what you're naming, because you were talking about some of these money messages that we got. And I see that all the time in just this social media fodder between therapists coming for each other's neck about like what we do when people do have, they talk about things like pay transparency and potentially setting higher industry standard rate for specialized psychotherapy and things like that. And I do think that there's been a lot of these messages that have been internalized about this, some moral experience of what it means to charge money and that what therapists should be doing, not doing. It's like people get put into this impossible, righteous moral standard, but then are mistreated in every element of at least US life, that the people that are struggling with poverty and poverty adjacent conditions are also shamed for being poor, right? And internalized messages about being lazy and having poor work ethic and not doing enough for themselves. So it's this incredibly narrow space that particularly people like in healthy professions can thrive in, where they're given messages about what they're supposed to pursue and want and be able to be compensated compared to other healthcare professionals and specialists. And it is a really confusing message even within our own field. So much of the work we do is exploring our own biases and needing to take a look at what are our own money messages, what are we projecting onto our clients, what are the biases we're coming to this space with. So I think that is really true. We have to name their own discomfort with these money conversations, and how do we work through that? And now a quick word about our amazing sponsor, Jane. Can we agree on something? Therapists are already doing enough. You're managing care, notes, scheduling, billing, all while holding space for everyone else. The last thing you need is a system that makes it harder. That's why I switched to Jane. It's intuitive, it's beautifully designed, and it just works. It saves me time and protects my energy. The customer support alone is worth it, but the smoother workflow, that's what made it a long-term solution for me. Use code AFFIRM1MO to get a 1-month grace period. Switch to Jane and see what it feels like to be supported by your EHR for once. Time to decide if Jane's a better fit. Big thanks to Jane for supporting this podcast. And now back to the interview. I know that you have already started to name some of these behaviors that you see associated with financial anxiety, whether that's avoidance, whether that's overspending or compulsive saving, whatever that looks like. When you look at those behaviors, and I'm sure there's obviously looking at the individual and understanding their unique relationship with money is part of it, but if we can maybe speak a little bit in broad strokes, what are the psychological needs that are served by something like overspending or avoidance or compulsive saving?
Yeah, for many clients that I work with, when it comes to things like overspending, for example, it's sometimes perhaps a dopamine rush, perhaps a way of numbing or again avoiding other things. It's so easy these days that we have access to shop and purchase anything we need pretty much at our fingertips. And for many people, that adding something to the cart is exciting. There's a novelty behind it. And so we're using spending and then overspending as a way of coping with emotions that might be difficult for us to name or regulate within ourselves. Or it might be coming from a place of impulsivity. I work with clients who live with ADHD, and sometimes overspending can show up as a sort of symptom of neurodivergence. And again, it's just a different form of coping in its own way. Other things, like when it comes to like compulsive saving, for example, again, can sometimes be this coming from this need of safety, right? Especially again, if there's any sort of experiences of financial trauma in early years, that saving in excess, despite being in a good financial situation, is something that can help an individual just feel a bit more comfortable. But then there might be a lot of feelings of guilt that come with spending. And for some people, these behaviors can also just be a form of control, right? That if we're trying to maybe even in a way rebel against the system, or again, from our experiences in childhood, that feeling like we are in control of our money, even though these patterns and behaviors say otherwise, it can show up that way as well. And ultimately, I think a lot of these behaviors too can stem from that place of fear, right? Fear of not having enough can lead to excessive saving, or even fear of not being enough can lead to overspending in the sense of I'm buying things to maybe feel better about myself or my life or my situation, especially if I'm seeing other people who might be further ahead than me, or I feel like I should be at a certain place in my life. And then because money is something we don't really talk about, right? Then that can create other problems for us where, yeah, debt, especially things like credit card debt, can pile up and then really put us into a difficult situation. So when I work with clients, I try to help them see that all of these things, these patterns or behaviors that they're doing with money are in many ways a form of a coping strategy. It's not that they're good or bad or one way or the other. It's just looking at whether these behaviors are helpful or unhelpful based on the goals and the values that they have for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you were sharing, that a lot of the people seeking you out are high achievers, and perhaps it's not that hard in our society to get into debt, even if you have a high income and like the appearance of having a lot of assets. But I think that piece of, like we talked about, the chronic stress and your nervous system being dysregulated the majority of the time of living in poverty and in poverty adjacent conditions. But I think also in our world, in the context of a highly capitalistic, consumer driven society, I do a lot of compassion focused therapy work, and we think about things through this lens of human survival and why our nervous system is always defaulting to those systems to keep us alive. And part of that is things like social rank theory, understanding that our positionality in society is part of what we're wired to keep us safe, not just that we're belonging and we're connected, but that we have some sort of status or level of value or contribution in our society so that we can protect our resource and protect our status, and therefore the safety of ourselves and the people we care about in this highly consumer driven society, with the backdrop of social media that allows access to constant comparison to other people. No matter what your financial standing is, we are all at risk for being in this constant elevated threat state, because it can always appear that people are at a higher status, that we're lagging behind, and put us in that perpetual state of drive and overdrive and overwork to try to compete and stay in that drive. So I think there are these diverging people, like kind of perspective people who are just feel so overrun by the system that they're like, screw it, I'm going to gravitate to what feels good and to self-soothe and nurture. And then the people who are like really trying to stay in the system and continuously seek status, and not keeping them in like a perpetual state of dysregulation as well. And I can definitely just, again, see this being the source of so much distress for people.
And I think the other part too is that when we are stuck in that sort of fight, flight, or freeze state, and we're not able to think more logically or critically about choices and behaviors when it comes to our money, we're more vulnerable to some of those like psychological marketing tactics, right? Like again, on social media, everybody's trying to steal your attention or sell you something when giving out, here's my free PDF or resource for this, but then ultimately trying to get you to buy into something else. And when we are in that, again, state of vulnerability, seeking a solution to a problem that we're going through, we might be more willing to spend on something if I feel like it's going to give me immediate relief from maybe what is this issue that I'm dealing with on the surface, when really there's work to be done deeper around emotional regulation, identity, again, our values, those types of things, that when we start to heal this relationship we have with money and even just become aware thing I like to do with clients that I work with too is some of that psychoeducation on ways that, businesses or stores try to get us to spend more. And in understanding that, we can be a little bit more cautious or at least have a little bit more free will in the choices and decisions that we're making with money so that, again, we're not operating from that state where we're just more likely to spend on something if it's not really aligned, if it's not aligned with our values.
Yeah. And I can see that being really empowering of just being like, there's influence. These businesses, to their credit, are trying to understand human behavior and human psychology to influence your buying habits and your purchasing habits. And that being cognizant of that is like an additional level of mindfulness where you can slow down and make a choice, right? And understand that how you're being influenced and then do a check-in if it's actually aligned with your values to proceed with that purchase. Or is that them being really skillful at hijacking like your psychology in that moment? Just feeling more empowered and mindful in our consumer habits is probably something we would across the board all benefit from. So absolutely. I think something that you mentioned that, is important is that some of the therapists' hesitancy to get into this space. And I imagine some of it is not wanting to act beyond our scope, right? That we're not financial advisors. We're not giving guidance of what to do with your portfolio and how to spend your money. So how are you helping folks talk about the habitual changes that potentially might not be workable or problematic for them and making those shifts in habits without maybe crossing that line?
So I preface with all of my clients and have it outlined in my consent form as well that financial therapy, the work that I do, really focuses on our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and the relationship that we have with money. And that by no means am I going to be providing like financial advice or financial information, that the work that I do is not a substitute for that. And if clients are looking for more of that type of support, then I do have individuals within the city that I live in who I can support them with referral or redirect them. And sometimes I'll have clients where they're working in conjunction with myself and maybe a financial planner to have a more holistic or well-rounded approach when it comes to this. But yeah, I would say it's more about really taking those therapeutic tools and approaches and techniques and just having that money as like a lens that I'm viewing the client situation through. And again, it might be the case that we are starting with an issue that perhaps doesn't seem money related, but in some way, shape, or form, money will show up in the conversations that I have with clients in session, even if it's, for example, clients who might be canceling sessions on a consistent basis. Perhaps it's the case that they're not in a state financially where they can afford to pay for sessions. And so we need to, even in bringing it up in that way, it opens the door for us to have a more supportive conversation about where they're at. Again, even if financial therapy isn't the thing that they're looking for in the first place. But I would say there's a lot of tools and skills that we have as therapists that we use to help clients deal with a range of other presenting concerns that can overlap very well when it comes to some of this financial stress or money related types of anxiety.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of like therapeutic modalities that you find particularly synergistic with this type of work?
Yeah, the approach that I tend to draw from the most is acceptance and commitment therapy because I really find that there's a lot of things around things that are largely out of our control when we look at maybe things that are happening within the greater economy, things that maybe are happening for us in a work-related type of environment, and then getting to that place where we can accept and focus on what are those things that I can do, and what are those values that I have that can help to drive or guide or influence my behaviors, and then also the self-compassion piece of that approach, right? How can I be kinder to myself when I'm going through some of these challenges or stressors or difficulties when it comes to my financial situation and the relationship I have with money? And then even mindfulness too, like we talked about earlier, just being mindful of these spending choices or decisions when it comes to money, or just mindful of some of the emotions that come up whenever it's in a situation where we're dealing with our finances.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can see that compassion piece being so critical. You mentioned how shame can be so central to financial anxiety. And I imagine if someone is in a situation that's difficult, or they feel like maybe they've made some missteps, or their financial spending habits have gotten in the way, that those sorts of things, like elevating and escalating experiences of shame. What's your experience of introducing compassion in this space with financial stress, in terms of people's receptiveness, any barriers that you see people coming up against when they're trying to maybe be open to self-compassion?
I think it's just that shame itself is such an uncomfortable emotion for us to experience as human beings. And so that can often drive a lot of these avoidance types of behaviors. And shame is very, yeah, like you mentioned, closely tied to money. And so in being able to address it, I like to just help clients when we're exploring their story, connect the dots between some of these patterns and behaviors that they're experiencing, and validating and helping them see that the way that you're interacting or treating money is normal and it makes sense given the context of your experiences. And for a lot of individuals that I work with, there's this common theme of nobody really taught me how to deal with money, or what to do with it, or how to earn money, or how to use money as a tool or resource to support myself. And so when we dive into that, I like to take the approach of letting clients know it makes sense, right? It makes sense that we have these types of struggles or challenges if this was a skill that we've never learned before, right? And so recognizing, for a lot of people that tend to see me as well, they are very financial literate, right? So they know a lot about money. They know a lot about what they, like, quote unquote, should be doing. But again, it's just something getting in the way of actually being able to take those steps to do it or make changes in their situation. Or again, even just recognizing sort of the greater systems that are at play that are keeping them stuck, right? So again, removing that burden or the blame and shame they're placing on themselves, and looking at, when we look at things in a broader context, how does that also contribute to the situation? And then again, normalizing it given the context of the experience that they're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like for you and the population you're working with, people are coming in with that foundation of financial literacy. If you're coming up against someone who, like, perhaps that is also a core element, just that there is limited financial literacy, and that is like a component. As a therapist, are you ever making recommendations of good resources for them to get some of that financial literacy, like a place to start? Is that something that you're gently introducing in that space, or is it really pointing them to resource?
Yeah, so I would say a little bit of both. And sharing resources in the sense of maybe there are books or even podcast recommendations of people who are more in that financial field to listen to. I like to make sure I've explored these resources myself and at least vetted them, making sure that if it is a professional, let's say, that I'm also referring the individual to, that it's a financial professional who operates ethically and is someone who is fee only or advice only and isn't going to be trying to take advantage of a client and try to sell them more products. I like to make sure that I've vetted any kind of professionals that I'm going to be referring a client to, just to maintain the therapeutic relationship that I have with them. But yeah, really trying to stay in my own lane and not provide information that is out of my scope. I tell my clients too, I'm not going to necessarily sit with you and help you make a budget, because again, I think that crosses that line where that's not an area that is my specialty or focus. And it's also not something that I need to know. I tell a lot of clients too that you don't need to tell me how much you're making or how much you're spending, because that information really, in the context of the work we're doing, is irrelevant. Again, it really goes back to just your experience and the way that it's getting in the way or causing problems in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really an important piece to name, that knowing explicitly the numbers is like almost irrelevant. It's like, really, it's more about the beliefs and the habits and the patterns and how they've been organizing their lives around this relationship with money that is critical. Any sort of favorite strategy or interventions? I know you broadly talked about acceptance and commitment therapy and compassion focused interventions being really central, but any sort of specific tools or exercises you have found particularly impactful with the clients that you're working with?
Yeah, so I like to, when it comes to things like the more so like emotional reactions with money. So any kind of things that can help with the emotion regulation, grounding types of techniques. One that I tend to use very frequently is stop. So helping clients acknowledge that when they are feeling triggered or experiencing some distress, especially in the context of money, just to be able to stop and take a deep breath, take a step back, observing what's going on and being curious about their experience. So, what kind of thoughts are showing up? What kind of emotions are showing up in the present moment? And then taking that next step to proceed in a way that's more aligned with their values and what matters to them. So, again, just getting some distance from thoughts and emotions in the present moment and looking at the situation from a bigger lens. Even things like framing it in a way of, if money was a person and they walked in the room, what would you do? Or what would you say to them? Or how would you feel? Just like frame it or externalize it into more of that relationship sense, or kind of that money is this thing that is now more of a something personified, right? So that we can really start to see what are some of those beliefs or the relationship that shows up. And also just looking at, again, those beliefs and those stories, and even ways to try to reframe or rewrite some of those things. So, for example, one of the clients I met with this week, we talked about reframing the word budget because that felt very restrictive and something that we have to stick to. And if we spend over the budget, bringing up a lot of feelings of guilt and shame and stress, reframing that word to be more of like a spending plan, which when we just shift the wording or the language around something can really create a shift in how it starts to feel. And the way that they described it was a plan. If you were planning to go on a trip, there's a little bit of flexibility there, is what that meant to them. So the idea of having a spending plan, reframing it meant that they didn't have to be so restrictive, but again, not completely go over their limits and what they're able to spend.
Yeah, I love that. And again, like recognizing what are the things that are triggering threat, like that threat response, and where can they be reworked and reconfigured in a way where there's maybe a more neutral or open relationship with money. Do you find yourself, for those who are really presenting as more avoidant or really paralyzed around money, maybe the people who can't open their bank statement, can't check their credit card, aren't paying bills, do you feel like exposure work ever becomes like an important piece of this?
Yeah, it can. Yeah, it can. It depends on the client and their situation, but there's definitely some clients where we might start with really small steps, such as just opening up your online banking. Let's sit together in the session and open it up on your phone and just acknowledging and seeing how that feels. And then in the moment there, working on some of that grounding and self-regulation. It might be some other types of exercises or experiments I've given clients are when you make a purchase, right? Tracking how that feels for you. Really breaking down when there is that avoidance showing up and it's showing up pretty strongly, looking at ways to break down those things that they are avoiding into those really small achievable steps. And even, yeah, when possible, doing some of that in session so that they can start to see and work through some of the distress that is showing up. Also, going back to the question you asked earlier about approaches, another thing that I've done with clients in my practice is using EMDR when it comes to financial trauma, especially some of those more deeply rooted or deeply instilled unhelpful core beliefs, and using that as a tool to help reprocess, again, those memories or experiences that were connected to the trauma so that we can be able to move through it and then get to more of the work that we need to focus on in the present moment. Because I sometimes find that if we are stuck in that financial trauma, that without going back there and working on those specific challenges, it can really, again, keep people stuck in this cycle where they continue to experience stress or anxiety related to money because we haven't addressed the root issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like also something powerful about your work is this is a time where, and I love that you're using ACT, is this is also not something to pathologize. And that fact that being worried about money is a very legitimate concern, right? There are real life consequences for not paying, being able to pay your bills or not having the resource to get access things that we need to do to sustain a quality of life that works for us or works for the people that we love, but moving people in these values aligned directions with these concepts of self-compassion and mindfulness, I think is so powerful. I know we've talked about recognizing when financial anxiety starts to interfere with well-being, when it might be clinically significant. But on the other side of that, do you see as some of the hallmarks that people have a healthy relationship with money?
I would say it's when money feels like it's something you don't have to worry about as often, right? Because again, when we think about anxiety and we think about the purpose of worry, there is that degree where some anxiety and some stress is helpful because it keeps us on our toes and it motivates us to take action. But it's, yeah, when we have a healthy relationship with money, we're not worried about it as much. It's not causing as much strain or problems or difficulty in our lives. We are maybe more free to make those choices and decisions that are, again, more closely aligned with our values and what matters to us. And that can look very different depending on the individual. And it's really just being able to move through life with a little bit more ease and a little bit more confidence in the things that we're doing now and a sense of security for our future.
Yeah, absolutely. What are things you are thinking about to do this work in a culturally responsive way, particularly when you're working with folks from diverse backgrounds? I'm sure that they're all sort of structural forces. People's cultural identities have a huge role in their relationship with money. Oppressive forces like racism. We talked about things like gender and gender roles also having an impact. So for you, what are the ways that we can do this work in a culturally responsive way?
I think it's similar to how we treat other issues in our work, being culturally responsive, being open-minded to what money can mean for the individual. Again, it can mean various things depending on the culture or the environment that you grew up in. And being able to acknowledge and separate maybe some more of those Western narratives or ideals that we have with money. Not every individual wants to strive for financial freedom or financial independence, right? Because I would say that's more of a belief system that's ingrained in westernized cultures. For some people, there may be more of a focus on this idea of shared wealth or, yeah, spreading the wealth throughout the family dynamic. And for some, it maybe there's a little bit of disconnect or dissonance between their experience moving from one culture or one country to somewhere that has a totally different view and understanding and meaning of money. So really just being open and curious about what are some of those values, again, belief systems and underlying meanings that money plays or represents for the individual, or even looking at some of the intergenerational patterns or experiences and how those can also play a role and influence as well. And I think, like, really with any of this, it's just not making those assumptions and being mindful of our own biases and beliefs around money as well.
Absolutely. Michelle, thank you so much. This was such a fantastic conversation. Can you tell our audience where people can find you, learn more about this important work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Instagram. My handle is at Take Care Therapy. And then also my website, which is www.takecaretherapy.ca.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining our community on the Affirming Minds podcast. If you love this episode as much as we did, please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and share it on your socials. If you want more information about how this podcast can add to your continuing education credits, visit affirmmentalhealth.com. And remember, let's affirm, heal, and grow together.